They would be really disappointed with me tonight because I am going to use my notes, but I do have a ton of research to share with you guys, so that's why you're going to see me looking at my computer a lot. I also have a 2-year-old, so I don't have time to myself. So thanks everyone for coming out tonight. This topic, peaceful parenting, is something that's really important to me. I'm very passionate about it. I do believe that children should be treated as individuals that have rights, just like you would treat family, friends, neighbors, etc. And I think they deserve a voice. And I also think that parents should actually enjoy their relationship with kids, and they should have a joyful time being a parent and raising kids. So this is definitely something that will help in that effect. And as many of you, as like many of you, I have been a libertarian for many years. And I have been searching for the answer to the question, how do we create a more peaceful world, and even possibly, if we're lucky one day, get rid of the government and have more justice in the world. Yeah. And well, a lot of us have kind of given up on the idea that someone's going to come along and be elected and fix all these problems. It's nice when a good person's in there, but we know it's not going to fix the problem. I had to think of other solutions. So about 3 to 4 years ago, I came to 2 realizations. One of which is that while we unfortunately have to live in this world as adults, we have to give up our things and deal with cops trying to put us in cages and all that kind of stuff that the government inflicts upon us, we do have this amazing ability to give our children a peaceful and free society in our own homes as parents, at least for the first 17, 18 years before they are taxed to death and all that kind of stuff. So in addition to giving our kids this amazing gift, which to me is just their human right, we have the ability to create the next generation or generations in the future who are going to value these ideals, who are going to fight for peace and seek out justice, and hopefully help one day end the heavy hand of government. So that's, to me, what peaceful parenting is able to accomplish. So that's one of the reasons I'm really passionate about it, and plus I just think it's the moral right thing to do as a libertarian. I'm all about morality and all that stuff. Unfortunately, as you guys probably know, society is not on our side. They are very much against these peaceful parenting principles, and that means it's going to be a little bit of an uphill battle. It means your friends, your family, your parents, your grandparents, your in-laws, they're not going to agree with you on a lot of things. Even medical professionals aren't going to agree with you on a lot of things. So it does make it a little bit hard, but I'm hoping tonight I can ask you guys to just forget about everything society's told you about raising kids, because most of it's wrong. We're going to start from scratch, and I'm hoping that I can provide you with some research that will help persuade you that this is the right way to go when it comes to parenting. Because as parents, we have choices, right? We have the choice to be parents who listen to and respect our kids, or we can be ones that disregard their feelings and treat them as pets who need to be trained in obedience. We can choose to have a strong, loving relationship with our children, or we can have relationships based on fear and oppression with our children. And lastly, we can choose to raise thoughtful human beings who know what it is to be respected, or we can choose to raise obedient soldiers who know the definition of respect but have never truly been respected. So, as peaceful, loving, libertarian parents, one of the first things that we should want for our children is for them to be treated as individuals with individual rights, just like we would with anybody else. And you might think, okay, well, what are we really doing to kids that's not treating them with individual rights? One thing that's happening in certain parts of the world, not everywhere, thankfully, but in certain parts of the world, there is this cultural ritual whereby parents are choosing to forcefully remove pieces of their children's body, both male and female, sometimes on the day they're born, sometimes all the way up to their 15th birthday. And of course, they're doing this without their children's consent. And it's, in my opinion, something that we need to be aware of and that we need to help stop. Unfortunately, one of the few places that this is happening is the United States. I am, of course, talking about male circumcision, one of those controversial topics. I realize that probably every single man in this room was circumcised. I'm sorry, guys. And that there's probably parents who also chose to do that for their kids. I don't want to hate on you. I'm not trying to knock on you. I am pretty pissed off at society and medical professionals for making us believe this is normal and this is something that we should be doing. So I'm not trying to knock on anybody who's done it, but I do want to talk about it because I think one day we will finally see this for what it really is. And that is basically not respecting our children and their body and their right to choose which body parts are taken from them, if any. So if you, let's see, to anyone who's, let's say, not persuaded by the whole don't take body parts from people without their consent. That doesn't persuade you. I also have some research that I'd like to share. So let's talk about the health benefits, the supposed health benefits. They are very widely contested. I've been doing a little research on this, very interesting stuff. And I'll start with the American Academy of Pediatrics. So from 1971 to 2012, they had the official statement that there are no valid medical indications for circumcision in the neonatal period. Why the hell have we been doing it? I have no idea. But that was their statement, right? Up until 2012. And then all of a sudden in 2012, they changed their statement, and I'm not entirely sure why, but they changed it to say, quote, existing scientific evidence demonstrates potential medical benefits of newborn male circumcision. However, and this is important, this is in their statement, however, these data are not sufficient to recommend routine neonatal circumcision. So we think the choice should be left to parents. So in a nutshell, what they're saying is that there's been some research, but it's really not sufficient to prove that there's any benefits. So we're not going to actually recommend it, but we're going to leave it up to parents. So why did they change their tune on this topic, right? My thought as why they changed is because they're actually a professional organization with doctors as their members, and who paying members, of course. And doctors, as you know, make money when they perform this surgery upon infants. And a lot of parents actually like this kind of surgery because they don't, according to a lot of surveys, parents say they don't want their kids to look weird, they don't want their kids to be teased, and they want their kids to look like their dad. So they're going to perform a surgery on them that the kid has no choice in.
Is it covered by insurance?
It is currently covered by insurance. So my thought is that they were worried that it would no longer be covered by insurance, and therefore people would actually stop doing it, which would be awesome. But they don't want that because they're paying members or doctors who get paid. So that's my guess as to why they changed it. But I also want to point out that the AAP in 2010 also made the recommendation that doctors should be allowed to perform what is called the ritual nick, whereby they take a scalpel and actually cut female genitals, babies, infant baby girls, just enough to draw blood in order to appease families who they think would otherwise take them home to their home countries to have a full female circumcision, known as female genital mutilation. Which of course we don't want that. We don't want that at all, but we also don't want the American Academy of Pediatrics saying it's okay for doctors to cut our baby girls' genitals. I also don't think they should cut baby boys' genitals, but hey, you know, we're just talking about girls right now. So if you're just going to trust the AAP, just remember that they also had made that statement. They did recant, thankfully, so they've taken that statement back. They no longer are pushing for that. But hey, you know, because the United States is literally the only Western nation that still performs circumcision. They don't do this anywhere else in the world, okay, unless it's a Jewish or a Muslim community. You don't see it happening in Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. They don't do this shit anymore. Pardon my language. And so in 2012, when this statement came out from the AAP, they, a lot of health professionals, 38 health professionals from these countries, put together an article where they said that this statement is culturally biased, and the only possible truth is that circumcision might actually lessen the chance of an infant getting a urinary tract infection. But of course, that's something that can easily be treated with antibiotics. There's no need to remove body parts. So, you know, that's not really a justification for it. And as far as the other claims, there are other medical claims that are supposed, again, that it could reduce the fact of a male getting HIV or HPV from a female partner, which usually HIV comes from male and male. But this is suppose we can reduce from getting it from a female partner. These health professionals in other countries said, quote, it's questionable, weak, and likely to have little public health relevance in a Western context. And it does not represent compelling reasons for surgery before boys are old enough to decide for themselves. So look, if you believe that, oh, I really feel strongly that this could reduce the chance of my kid getting HIV or HPV, then look, wait until your kid is sexually active and then they are able to give consent for the surgery. Don't do it when they're too little to decide for themselves. Okay, that's just my opinion on that. Anyone who believes that contracting UTIs is some reason for cutting off body parts, I ask you, if they said the same for your female babies, would you circumcise them? Because I know a lot of adult women who get UTIs and it's annoying. They have to drink cranberry juice, take antibiotics, but I would definitely not recommend cutting off a piece of their genitals to stop that. So it is really my hope that in the near future, we look at male circumcision in the same way that we look at female genital mutilation, And that is as something that we just would never even imagine doing to our children. So if you haven't had kids yet and you're gonna have a boy, I'm having one in July, I would never do that to him. I really encourage you to really do the research if you need to, if I didn't persuade you today. There's a group called Doctors Opposing Circumcision. They're having a documentary coming out in August on video or on YouTube. So check that out if you need to. So similar to the importance of protecting our children's rights, it is also our duty as parents to protect their well-being, right? To raise them for optimal development, right? We don't want them to suffer. We want to treat them in the right way so that they grow up to be healthy, intelligent, thoughtful adults, right? So one thing I'm going to talk about now is the dangers of the so-called Ferber method, the crying it out method. So again, I apologize to anyone who did this to their kids. You might not have known better, but I still want to talk about it. It's very, very important that we don't do this to our children. Obviously, we want what's best for our children. We don't need to have this belief that they need to be trained in order to forego their own instincts in order to please us and to give us a full night's sleep. Because look, if you haven't had kids yet, let me warn you, you're not going to get a lot of sleep for a while. I have a 2-year-old and she still wakes up once a night usually, you know, for like a minute or two, and I get her back to sleep. But especially in the first year, don't expect to get any sleep. It's just part of the deal. If you can't handle that, don't have kids, because that's just part of it, you know. Kids have needs. The reason why babies cry is because that's how they communicate. That's how they tell you that they need something. And whether it's they need their diaper changed, they need to eat, they need to go to sleep, all these needs matter, and the need to be loved and held and calmed by their parents is just as important of a need. And just because it's nighttime doesn't mean that need is going to go away. So just be aware, you're going to be waking up a lot with infants. But unfortunately, there's a lot of damage caused by this whole letting babies cry thing, and this is something that a lot of parents do. I don't know if anyone in this room is practicing this or has or wants to comment on it later, but anyone who hasn't had kids and doesn't know what the Ferber method is, I will give you a little background. It's a theory that suggests that infants as young as 4 months old should be trained to independently sleep on their own. Basically, they want to train them, like dogs, to sleep through the night so that the parents aren't bothered, right? Because they need their sleep. So we don't need babies waking up and bothering us or whatever. So Dr. Richard Ferber came up with this method. This behaviorist view, according to a lot of psychologists and the research I've done, is not in any way taking human development into consideration. So according to Laura Markham, Dr. Laura Markham, she's the author of this book, Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids. I really recommend it. She mentions that, you know, the real true way that we create independence in children is by meeting their needs. There is this strange hypothesis that you're creating independence in your children by letting them cry and cry and cry and cry until they fall themselves to sleep. But that's just not true, and data and research and studies have proven it. So the real way you create independence is by meeting their needs, especially when they're really, really little. Because in order to teach babies to self-soothe, we must be responsive and be able to meet their needs before they get really stressed out, whenever possible. And what this does is it tunes the body and the brain up for calmness, and it teaches them how to calm down. Because when a baby is scared and a parent holds and comforts them, the baby builds the expectations for soothing, which gets integrated into the ability to self-comfort. So you might say, oh, well, if we keep comforting them, then they're just going to think that all they have to do is cry and we're going to calm. Well, yeah, that's part of being a parent. That's why they're crying, because they need you, and if you want to be a good parent, you're going to have to meet those needs. That's just part of the deal, once again. Laura Markham also points out, I'll give a quote, that all emotional development, including our ability to regulate our emotions, control our tempers, delay gratification, and form healthy romantic relationships, is built on the nurturing we receive as infants. So for the first year of life especially, we are setting them up for either success or failure in life. And it's really, really important that we're meeting their needs early on, especially because it really is going to determine the people that they become. When an infant's needs are met, they internalize that the world is a trustworthy place and that relationships are supportive. Otherwise, if they're not met, they learn that relationships can't be trusted, and they have a hard time developing relationships later on in life. When an infant's needs are not met, in fact, their cortisol levels, their stress hormone, rises, it becomes elevated, and what that does is it raises heart rate, blood pressure, reduces oxygen level, depletes energy level, and causes cardiac stress. So this is what we're doing to our babies when we're letting them cry and cry and cry and saying, oh, figure it out on your own, you need to be independent. So that's what happens. Now, you might be thinking, oh, well, I did the Ferber method, or I know people have done it, and the kids, after about a week of crying, they stopped crying. They fell asleep on their own. They're independent now at 6 months old. So obviously it works. Well, let's wonder why the kids have stopped crying after a certain period of time, because, sadly, those kids have been trained to know that nobody's coming for them. Isn't that sad? They know that no one's coming, so expressing their stress, discomfort, and fear is absolutely futile. What the researchers have found that's interesting is that these cortisol levels, the stress hormones, are still being elevated. Even when these kids aren't crying, they might be laying in there quiet, but these stress levels are still going up. They are still extremely distressed. But remember, they know that there's no point in communicating their stress because ain't no one coming to help them. Not their mom, not their dad, not their babysitter. So they just have to deal with it, and it's part of life for them. And so it's pretty sad. So long-term damage that numerous studies have found include children having less intelligence, more anxiety, more likely to or less likely to cooperate with others, more alienation, insecurity, difficulty regulating stress, increased dependence, despite what society tells you, less likely to be healthy, and increased anger and aggression. This all stems from them not having their needs met when they're really, really young. In contrast, a lot of studies have found there's positive outcomes to meeting the needs of our young ones, which makes sense to me. These positives include increased intelligence, empathy, lack of aggression or depression, self-regulation, social competence, and having the ability to explore new environments because they know their security or their caregivers is there. They know their parents have their back. Mom and dad are always there, so they can go out and explore the world and do things and eventually become more and more independent. My 2-year-old is like that. She scales walls. She's a little daredevil. She does everything she can. She knows I'm right there to catch her if she falls. And that's a big part, I think, of being a parent and raising competent and healthy and intelligent, thoughtful kids. Lastly, I'll point out in a 2010 report from the National Scientific Council on Developing the Child, they say that when children have positive early experiences, they strengthen their developing biological systems and are more likely to thrive and become healthy adults. It also provides a foundation for building sturdy brain architecture as well as a broad range of skills. So there's so many positives that come out of meeting your children's needs, as annoying as it may be to get up in the middle of the night or to hold them every time they cry, etc. I also want to point out that Dr. Ferber himself, while not totally recanting his theory, has actually come out and said, quote, "I never encourage parents to let their babies cry it out," and apparently wishes his name wasn't connected to the cry it out method that a lot of parents swear by. So please do not let your kids cry and cry. Please hold them. They need your love. So as we can see, there's a lot of damage that can happen to your kids by simply doing nothing. On the flip side, there's also plenty of damage that can occur by doing something, when that something is spanking or other forms of child abuse. So, as libertarians, I think we all hopefully are on board with this, and we know that spanking is a form of aggression and violence, and it violates the NAP, because we are not defending ourselves against our kids. Let's hope not. So we really have no reason to strike them. And you might hear the argument, well, it's a parent's right to hit their kids or spank their kids or whatever. But I would disagree because, look, children are not property that we can do what we want with. Children are human beings with rights. And I would say our parental rights end where, harm comes to our children. Because, hey, they have rights too. In addition, they have nowhere to go. It's illegal to hit your spouse, right? But your spouse has the ability to get up and leave if they want to. It's not illegal to hit your kid, but your kid can't go anywhere. So, does it make sense? Not to me. Alright, so it's also time for us to respond to those people who make the claim, I was spanked as a kid and I turned out fine. Or, my favorite, I'm glad that my parents whooped my ass as a kid. I was a brat. Have you heard people say that? Oh my gosh. Okay, so here's the first point I'll make. Spanking is not effective in the short or the long term, according to research, alright? While it may be true that they'll stop doing the bad behavior, like in the moment, so let's say your little boy is hitting his sister, you say, hey, stop hitting your sister, and you smack them, and look, they're going to stop hitting their sister in the moment because they're busy being hit by you, but that, it doesn't actually reduce the undesired behavior. In a 2016 study by Professor Elizabeth Gershoff, she finds that the more children are spanked, the less, or the more likely they are to defy their parents, in fact. She goes on to say that, quote, spanking has the opposite effect than what parents want. It doesn't make children better behaved, and it doesn't teach children right from wrong. It's not related to immediate compliance, and it doesn't make children behave better in the future. So why isn't spanking effective? Well, she notes in a previous study in 2013 that, quote, hitting by its nature causes physical pain. I mean, why else would you do it, right? Unless you're trying to cause your kid pain. That's why people spank, because they think it's going to stop something. So it causes physical pain, and it can be confusing and frightening for children, imagine that, to be hit by someone they love and respect and on whom that they are dependent. Children report fear, anger, and sadness when they're spanked, which are feelings that interfere with their ability to internalize their parents' disciplinary action. So they are so caught up in the fear, the anxiety, the sadness, that they're not thinking about what you're telling them. They're not listening to what you're saying. All they know is, I need to avoid this person, or what have you, as their parents. So spanking, of course, also does not teach children why their behavior was wrong or what they need to do instead. But what it does teach them is that when the threat of physical punishment exists, you got to behave a certain way. But once that's gone, say when you're not in the same room with your parents, the behavior can continue, and you can continue behaving inappropriately. So that's one of the reasons why it's not effective. It also creates a do as I say, not as I do form of parenting. You never ever hear people say, don't hit your sister, whack. You know, it's kind of confusing, it's hypocritical, and kids just don't get that. They're like, it just doesn't make any reasonable sense, Mom. All right, so damaging effects of spanking. Studies have found that there are many, including increased aggression, hostility towards others, increased mental health problems in childhood and adulthood, delinquent behavior in childhood, and criminal behavior in adulthood. Which is funny because a lot of people will say, oh, this kid's going to turn out to be the next school shooter if you don't whoop their butt. I hear people say that on Facebook, and oh, it makes me so mad. You're actually more likely to be engaged in criminal behavior if you are spanked as a kid. Obviously, a lot of spanking. I'm not saying a couple times, right? There's also the chance to have a vulnerability to depression, which is typical in girls, and antisocial tendencies typical in boys. It's also been found to erode developmental growth and decrease a child's IQ. And of course, because parents are modeling the use of aggression and violence, they're teaching their children it's acceptable and reasonable for the person in charge to use violence to get what they want. So these are the kind of people that are going to grow up, and they're going to look at the state and be like, well, you're in charge, so go ahead and put me in a cage, go ahead and, you know, shoot at me or take my stuff. You're in charge, so that's what happens, right? We don't want to raise people like that. Don't want. Oh, and lastly, this Elizabeth Gershoff, who's the author of these two studies, said, quote, I have a couple answers I give to people who think, my parents spanked me and I turned out okay. First, we turned out okay because our parents did other things, like sat us down and talked about why, gave us reasons and why they wanted us to act a different way. And also, we turned out okay in spite of spanking, not because of spanking. So let's remember this. Let's drop these bombshells on people who go around saying, I was spanked and I was okay. You know what I also think is that when you're spanked as a kid, you probably are a little bit in denial that you were possibly abused a little bit as a kid. You don't want to think that. And you also love your parents, of course, and so you want to defend them. So I think that's a lot of the reason why people say this. It's also possible that these people have internal problems that are caused by repeated spankings, and they don't even realize it. So bottom line, don't spank your kids. The last thing I want to talk about, which may be more controversial, is the idea of discipline. Should we discipline our kids? Should we not? I would argue that no, we should not discipline our kids. And in fact, we can teach our kids everything about right and wrong and everything about how to behave and how to make right choices in the world without using any form of punishment whatsoever. But rather, we can be their coach, their guide, their mentor in life, and hey, even their friend. I know people say we're not supposed to be their friend, but hey, why not, right? We could be their friend. Discipline, unfortunately, harms our relationship with our children. And again, there's a lot of research on this stuff, so please read these kind of books, Peaceful Parent, Happy Kids. I'm just going to give you a little bit of information, but there's so much more out there as to why discipline is not the right approach. And I want to make it clear that you can still raise really good kids, and you can still teach them right from wrong without using punishments. I'm not just talking about spanking, I'm talking about timeouts, consequences, go sit in the corner, sit in the naughty chair. I'm saying don't do any of that kind of stuff. For one of the reasons is because it harms our relationship with our kids, right? And having a good relationship with our kids is what is going to help make them become the people that we hope for them to be, and the people that they hopefully want to be, compassionate, kind individuals who make good choices in life, right? So in her book, again, Dr. Laura Markham, she shares with readers that Quote, children thrive when they feel connected and understood. Parenting effectively depends, above all, on your connection to your child, period. Otherwise, we have no influence over them, right? She also adds, surprise, surprise for us, that small humans rebel against force and control just as big humans do. It's ingrained in us, you guys. Luckily, they're always open to our influence as long as they respect us and feel connected to us. What raises great kids is coaching them rather than controlling for immediate compliance, right? So we want to be their mentors, their guides, their coaches. We don't want to be that authority figure telling them to go to their room, go to the naughty chair, what have you. Also we should be helping our kids, not controlling them. We are responsible parents. We want to raise peaceful, thoughtful kids who don't just obey authority, right? We want them to think for themselves. So another great book that I've been reading, it's called Discipline Without Damage. I don't like the title because, again, I don't like discipline, but she does talk in the book about why discipline is wrong. I think she uses the title because so many parents come to her about discipline. It's the #1 thing parents come to her about. How do I discipline my kids? Obviously, parents want to know. So I think that's the purpose of the title. So she points out that self-control comes with development and is strengthened over time with experience. The frontal and prefrontal cortex are the areas of the brain responsible for self-control, and they are the last to mature in our children. So it's not surprising that our children aren't going to have a lot of self-control. Their brains aren't fully developed yet. They don't have the ability to have self-control, so we can't really expect them to. So we need to be understanding and kind with them. When we use rewards, even rewards, she talks about, aren't really right because it's the wrong reason that we're doing things. So when we use rewards or punishments to create behavior that seems like self-control, all we're really doing is tricking the brain into conformity. So while it seems like they're learning self-control, they're really just learning that they need to behave in the way that we want so that they don't have to lose their connection to us. Because that's what kids want the most at very young ages, is to be connected to us. They are always looking for us. They need our reassurance, they need our guidance, and they want to be connected to us. And so LaPointe, she calls this a behavioral facade. So we think that we're teaching them self-control, we're not, by punishing them. Children need an emotional connection to us in order to learn self-control over time. It takes years and years of us responding calmly and compassionately to upsets in order to develop the neural infrastructure for them to truly self-regulate. So we are the models, right? We have to model what self-regulation looks like and what it is. We can't be getting all frustrated and upset, as hard as that can be. I have a 2-year-old, again, it's very hard. We have to try really hard not to get super upset when they have their meltdowns and all that kind of stuff, because it does happen. We can expect our children to act like children because, oh my gosh, they are children. But we can't act like children ourselves by simply getting mad and yelling, spanking, and punishing, because that's what makes us feel better in the short term. Because basically we have no control over our emotions. We're the adults, we can control our emotions, our kids can't. Children become less open to our influence when they feel that they are treated unfairly. So it's important to do all we can to put ourselves in their shoes, see where they're coming from, understand their feelings, understand their emotions, and then do everything that we can to guide them and even meet their needs whenever possible. Because, again, they didn't choose to be born, they didn't choose to live in our house or for us to be parents. It's kind of our responsibility. We brought them here. We got to treat them with respect and dignity and listen to them rather than just, shut up, go to your room, I'm tired of listening to this, which unfortunately a lot of parents, mostly in the olden days, kind of did. So, according to the author of Discipline Without Damage, when a child's stress is responded to calmly and with connection, the regulatory core of the brain is settled, the child feels secure, knowing that her needs will be met, and the challenging behaviors consequently become fewer and less intense. However, when strategies like timeouts and removal of privileges happen, their effect is based on fear, not connection, so the result is temporary. So if you really want to teach your child new things, you have to connect with them, and you have to listen to them and understand them, figure out where they're coming from. And if you do have to set limits, sometimes we do, you have to do it with empathy and with love, and coming from a point of understanding rather than just because I said so, or whatever kind of punishment you want to use. So I want to give you a quick example of what she talks about in her book to kind of give you an idea what I'm talking about. So she was at a play place with her kids, and one of them is 3 years old. and she sees him coming running towards her, and he's obviously really upset. Something really bad happened, and she's got her arms out, you know, to embrace him. And he jumps into her arms, and then he turns over and he punches her right in the nose. Oh. This little 3-year-old, right? So everybody in the room turns silent, and they're all staring at her like, what is she gonna do? How is she gonna punish this kid? You can't let something like that go, right? How is she gonna punish him? So, you know, she takes a second to like try to get the sting out of her nose, because that hurts, right? And then she scoops him up, and she walks over to the chair, and she sits down with him, and she strokes his hair, and she talks to him real calmly, and she does everything she can to calm him down, and tries to figure out what's wrong, and everything like that. Meanwhile, society, again, is judging her, and, you know, kind of giving her, oh, well, we do timeouts at our house, or this or that, and everyone's nodding in agreement and stuff. So this lady, who knows a lot better, she decides, okay, it's time for us to leave. So she gets up and leaves with her kids. And by the time they get to the car, her 3-year-old, he's calmed down now, he's happy again, all whatever he was upset about is over it now. His mom calmed him down. And so she's putting him in his car seat, and she looks at him and she smiles and says, hey honey, you know, it's really important that we remember to use our words in the future. We really don't want to hit, because it really hurts when you hit. So let's make sure we don't do that, you know. And he's like, okay mom, okay, sounds good. So she basically is choosing to give the teachable moment later when he's calm, because kids don't understand this kind of logic when they're really upset, number one. And number two, the reason why she doesn't let him have it or whatever, or lets him get away with it, as people will say, is because kids do not have that kind of self-control at that age. They're not trying to be a jerk to their mom. They just don't know how to control themselves, and they're obviously really upset. And this is someone that they love and trust, who they can go to, and unfortunately, sometimes kids do that kind of stuff, right? Well, the coolest thing I thought that made me tear up a little bit is that 2 days later, she's putting this little guy to bed, and he puts his little hands on her face and says, Mom, I'm sorry I hit you at the play place. You know what I mean? So rather than teach this kid a lesson in the moment by spanking him or dragging him out of the play place or yelling at him or punishing him, she teaches him a deeper lesson of what it means to calmly respond to somebody who's in a state of upset, to somebody who obviously can't respond on their own. She's actually teaching her kid a very valuable lesson by not punishing him, by instead coaching him, loving him, respecting him, and giving him the empathy that he so very much deserves. And I can say the same thing for my 2-year-old. Anytime I get upset, I try hard to mask it, but sometimes some things frustrate me and she'll come, I'm so sorry, Mama, you know? And it's just really cute. And kids, they love us and they want to be good people, so to speak. They just can't control themselves, so please remember that. The last thing I want to say tonight is that we can be the ultimate influencers by living in a partnership paradigm with our kids. Rather than being this authority figure, we can actually be in partnership with our kids. We can respect their needs as much as our needs be respected. I'm not saying let them walk all over you. I mean, that's going to happen a little bit at first because they have no ability to think for themselves logically. But you really want to make sure that everyone's needs are being met in the house, and that means siblings are getting along, their compromises are happening, with parents and children. And what ends up happening when you do that is that children become more adaptable in the face of challenging circumstances. They have better developing outcomes, and they're more likely to listen to you and your influence. Studies have shown that teenagers are less likely to or be harmed by the excesses of culture, if you will, when they have a good relationship with their parents, because they can come and talk to you when all these terrible choices come up that they have to make. They actually want to talk to you and they actually want your advice. And as peaceful parenting advocates will tell you, this whole teen rebellion thing, it doesn't happen in their house. It just doesn't happen. Because kids have nothing to rebel against. Their parents love and respect them and treat them kindly with fairness. So these teenagers, they don't end up rebelling, and they do end up coming to their parents for advice, which is awesome. And I want that to be the case for me and my kids. So in conclusion, treat your kids with respect, love, empathy, and compassion. And by doing so, we can not only provide them the peaceful, free worlds that they deserve to live in for the first 17, 18 years, we can also ensure that future generations are more likely to stand up for injustice, fight for peace, and hopefully stamp out governments around the world once and for all. Thank you.